winter of 1881, authorities in Leadville, Colorado, uncovered something that would haunt the mining camps of the Rocky Mountains for decades. Beneath the floorboards of the McKenna Sisters Saloon, investigators found 23 sets of women's clothing, each neatly folded and stacked like inventory in a warehouse. Tucked inside every bundle was a handwritten note listing a name, an age, a physical description, and, most chilling of all, a price. Not one of these women had been seen in Leadville for months, yet their belongings remained, catalogued with the cold precision of a livestock ledger. The clothing told stories of lives suddenly cut short. A blue calico dress still carried the faint scent of lavender soap. A pair of worn leather boots showed careful repairs, hints of both poverty and pride. A silver locket held the photograph of an elderly woman who would never know what happened to her daughter. Among the most heartbreaking discoveries were unsent letters to families back east, filled with hopes for new lives out west and promises to write again soon with news of success. The McKenna sisters, Catherine and Margaret, had vanished 3 days before the raid, leaving behind only these silent testimonies to crimes the authorities would spend years trying to piece together. Their disappearance was so sudden that neighbors swore they'd gone to bed one night as respected business owners, only for their building to stand empty the next morning, as if the mountain air itself had swallowed them whole. Before we dive deeper into the McKenna sisters' story and the dark truth behind their profitable establishment, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Drop a comment telling us what city or state you're watching from. We love hearing from our community of mystery enthusiasts, and your support helps us bring more of these forgotten stories to light. The investigation would soon reveal a human trafficking network stretching from Colorado's mining camps to the brothels of San Francisco. A conspiracy so methodical it shattered everything the frontier town thought it knew about the two Irish women who seemed like nothing more than hard-working saloon keepers. What investigators found proved that sometimes the most horrifying monsters are the ones who greet you with a warm smile over a cup of coffee and ask about your family back home. Leadville in 1881 was a city drunk on silver and gold, a place where fortunes were made and lost with the swing of a pickaxe. Desperate souls from across the country flocked there, chasing prosperity that glittered in every stream and rocky hillside. Perched over 10,000 feet above sea level in the heart of the Rocky Mountains, the town exploded from a few hundred residents to nearly 30,000 in just 3 years, making it Colorado's second largest city after Denver, and one of the wildest boomtowns in American history. The transformation was both remarkable and violent. What had once been a quiet valley where Ute tribes hunted elk and gathered medicinal plants had become a maze of wooden buildings, muddy streets, and the constant thunder of mining equipment. The Matchless Mine, the Little Pittsburgh, and dozens of other claims were pulling millions of dollars worth of silver ore from the mountains, creating instant millionaires and attracting every kind of fortune seeker imaginable. The air seemed to vibrate with ambition and desperation, thick with smelter smoke and the dreams of men convinced the next shovelful of dirt might change their lives forever. Summers brought streets knee-deep in mud, winters buried the town under snow for months at a time. But the promise of precious metals kept saloons, gambling halls, and businesses running 24 hours a day. Harrison Avenue, the main drag, was lined with places catering to every human need and vice. The Tabor Opera House, where top performers entertained the newly rich. Gambling parlors where fortunes changed hands over marathon poker games. And dozens of saloons where miners spent their pay faster than they earned it. The boom drew all sorts. Seasoned miners with calloused hands and silver dust in their hair. Sharp-suited businessmen from the East looking to make claims through legal trickery. Dance hall girls chasing higher pay than factory jobs back home. Con artists running elaborate swindles. And families hoping to carve out a future in the thin mountain air. Among them were Catherine and Margaret McKenna, two sisters in their late 20s who arrived from Boston in the spring of 1879, with their life savings sewn into their dresses, and a fierce determination to stake their claim in this chaotic new world. They caught attention not for anything scandalous, but for the calm, confident way they navigated a place that could intimidate even hardened frontiersmen. Catherine, the elder at 31, was striking. Auburn hair that glowed in lamplight, green, eyes that held warmth and calculation in equal measure, and a height of nearly 6 feet that commanded attention in an era when women were rarely that tall. She had a gift for conversation, making anyone feel like the most important person in the room, whether a grizzled prospector or a wealthy merchant. Her memory for personal details was legendary, and her charm made people open up, often without realizing every word was being filed away for possible use later. Margaret, 28, was quieter and possessed a gentle, almost maternal warmth. Her soft, brown hair, kind brown eyes, and soothing voice calmed even the roughest miners. Where Catherine was the charismatic face of their business, Margaret was its steady heart, handling finances, keeping precise records, and managing daily operations. She had an uncanny ability to tell if someone was truly alone or had family who might come looking if they vanished. The McKenna Sisters Saloon occupied a prime corner on Harrison Avenue in a 2-story wooden building they had purchased and renovated, supposedly with savings from years in Boston's textile mills. Solid timber from Denver, real glass windows instead of oiled paper, and a carefully fitted stone foundation made the building stand out in a town full of temporary structures. Inside, the ground floor featured a long mahogany bar brought in at great expense, polished pine tables finished like fine Eastern furniture, and a small stage where traveling musicians played to audiences of both millionaire mine owners and penniless prospectors sitting side by side. The walls of the saloon were lined with paintings of lush Irish countryside scenes that Catherine claimed reminded her of home, though no one in Leadville had ever heard the sisters speak with an Irish accent. The second floor, they told curious neighbors, held their private living quarters along with a few rooms they rented to respectable working girls who needed temporary lodging while getting settled in town. It was framed as an act of charity, a way to help decent young women avoid the seedy boarding houses that catered to prostitutes and dance hall girls. The rent was modest, and the sisters insisted on references and proof of moral character, cultivating the image of a sanctuary for virtuous women in a place where virtue was often a luxury. What set the McKenna establishment apart from the dozens of other saloons in Leadville wasn't just the quality of the whiskey or the gleam of the glassware, though customers appreciated both in a town where floors were usually sticky with spilled drinks and tobacco juice. It was their reputation for helping young women find respectable work that made them stand out. Word spread through the mining camps and neighboring towns that the McKennas were different. They offered room and board to women down on their luck, training them to tend bar, keep accounts, or manage other aspects of business. Church leaders praised them as examples of Christian charity. Even the Leadville Herald-Democrat ran a glowing article describing them as 2 angels of mercy, bringing civility to a harsh frontier. But the first crack in that perfect image didn't come from Leadville. It arrived in the form of a desperate letter at the marshal's office on a frigid November morning in 1880. The envelope was water-stained and battered from travel, postmarked in San Francisco, the handwriting shaky with either cold or fear. Inside, Marshal William Dugan found 8 cramped pages telling a story so disturbing he read them 3 times before accepting it as truth. The letter was from a young woman named Emma Kowalski, who claimed she had escaped from a brothel in the Barbary Coast District and was searching for her younger sister, Anna. Her words were heavy with desperation, the kind that comes from someone who's seen humanity at its worst and is fueled by a mix of love, guilt, and rage. Emma's story began with tragedy and ended with a horror she could barely process. She and Anna had been traveling west from Chicago after their parents died in a tenement fire that killed 17 people and left dozens homeless. The sisters, who worked in a hat factory, had saved every spare penny before the fire destroyed their apartment, taking everything except the clothes on their backs. With nothing left in Chicago but grief, they joined the flood of desperate souls heading west, hoping for honest work in towns that valued moral, hard-working women, but their journey drained their meager savings. By the time they reached Denver, winter was coming, and they were down to their last few dollars. That's when they first heard of the McKenna sisters, kind Irish women in Leadville who helped young ladies find respectable jobs and safe lodging. They arrived in Leadville on a September evening in 1880, exhausted from 2 bone-jarring days on a supply wagon that rattled over mountain roads. Filthy, frightened, and carrying everything in a single carpet bag that had belonged to their mother, they were relieved when Catherine and Margaret greeted them with hot soup, clean beds, and warm words about their bright future in the West. For the first week, the sisters seemed every bit the benefactors they claimed to be, feeding Emma and Anna the best meals they'd had since Chicago, providing fresh clothes, and offering advice on life in Colorado. Catherine spoke at length about opportunities for clever young women in hotels, restaurants, and even in the homes of wealthy families as housekeepers, companions, or governesses. She hinted at her wide network of business friends throughout the West, always looking for trustworthy girls for good-paying positions. But Emma's next words would haunt anyone who read them. After a week of kindness, Margaret announced they'd found excellent positions for the sisters in California, where, she promised, the pay and security would be even better. That evening, Margaret cooked a celebratory dinner: roast beef, potatoes, vegetables, fresh bread, and even a small cake for dessert. During the meal, Emma began feeling unusually drowsy. She thought it was just exhaustion from their travels and the relief of finally being safe. Anna complained of the same heavy fatigue. Margaret suggested they turn in early to be rested for the trip in the morning. When Emma awoke, she was in a wagon, jolting along a mountain road. Her hands were bound. Her head throbbed and her stomach churned with nausea. Anna lay beside her, unconscious, her breathing shallow and her face pale. Up front, driving the wagon, sat a tall, bearded man she had never seen before, speaking with a Spanish accent, casually joking with Catherine McKenna about the merchandise he was transporting. When Emma demanded answers, he laughed and told her in crude terms that she and Anna had been sold to businessmen in California who needed workers. The McKenna sisters, he said, had already been paid in full. The man spoke of their fate as if he were delivering livestock to market. And to Emma, that was almost as horrifying as the reality itself. Emma understood, with crushing clarity, that to these people she and Anna weren't human beings with dreams and futures. They were merchandise, bought and sold like sacks of flour or crates of mining tools. The trip to California lasted weeks. They were shuttled from wagon to train to ship, always under guard, always drugged whenever they showed signs of resistance or tried to escape. In her letter, Emma described the sickening moment she realized they were not alone. Dozens of other girls were being moved along the same route. Some had been lured in by the McKenna sisters. Others had fallen victim to similar operations in different towns. All were headed toward the same fate: forced prostitution in the brothels and cramped cribs of San Francisco's most dangerous district. They came from everywhere: Kansas farm girls whose families lost their land to drought, factory workers from eastern cities laid off during economic downturns, immigrants who had arrived in America with hope, only to find it could be as cruel as the homelands they'd fled. What they all shared was desperation, isolation, and the fatal misfortune of trusting people who saw their vulnerability as a business opportunity. Emma escaped only after months in captivity, when a fire tore through the building where she was being held. She slipped away in the chaos, hiding for weeks in alleys and abandoned buildings, scraping together pennies from odd jobs until she could afford passage east. All the while, she was haunted by the knowledge that Anna was still trapped somewhere in that nightmare. Her letter to the Leadville marshal was a plea: please investigate the McKenna sisters. Find Anna. Stop other girls from suffering the same fate. Marshal William Dugan was a seasoned lawman with 15 years of frontier justice under his belt. He had seen violence, greed, and corruption in every mining town in Colorado. But Emma's letter unsettled him in a way nothing else had. He knew the McKenna sisters. Catherine had poured him drinks at town meetings, remembering exactly how he liked his whiskey and asking thoughtful questions about local politics. Margaret had inquired about his wife's health with what seemed like genuine warmth, even sending over soup when Sarah Dugan was bedridden with pneumonia. The thought that these respectable women could be guilty of such evil was almost impossible to accept. Yet Emma's letter was too specific to dismiss. It contained intimate details only someone who had spent time with the sisters could know. The layout of the saloon, Catherine's habit of tilting her head when thinking, Margaret's quiet, humming as she worked. Dugan began a discreet investigation, knowing that any overt move could send the sisters into hiding. He started with missing person records for Leadville and the surrounding camps, but the task was frustrating. Record-keeping in frontier towns was spotty at best. Even so, the pattern that emerged chilled him. At least 15 families had reported daughters, sisters, or wives missing without explanation. The circumstances were strikingly similar. Young, women traveling alone or in pairs, arriving with little money or connections, last seen near establishments serving transient workers. In many cases, they had mentioned visiting the McKenna Sisters Saloon in hopes of finding work. The disappearances spanned time and background, making it harder for anyone to connect the dots. Margaret O'Brien, 18, had arrived from Ireland in March 1880 with her cousin. While her cousin found work at a boarding house, Margaret was told the McKenna sisters could find her something more fitting for her refinement. She entered their saloon one afternoon and was never seen again. Catherine claimed she had taken a position in Denver and promised to write once settled. Sarah Jenkins, 22, was traveling to California with her husband when he died in a mining accident near Fairplay. Alone and penniless, she came to Leadville, hoping to earn enough to continue west. Witnesses saw her speaking with Margaret McKenna about work in San Francisco. She disappeared the very night she was supposed to meet someone for the position, leaving behind her belongings and an unfinished letter to her sister in Ohio. Case after case echoed the same story. Women in desperate straits, lured by the sisters' reputation for helping, vanishing after expressing hope about a too-good-to-be-true opportunity. Many left behind personal effects or letters, evidence their departure had been neither planned nor voluntary. When Dugan discreetly questioned local business owners, the picture darkened further. Thomas Brennan, who ran a general store nearby, recalled seeing young women arrive at the saloon with small travel bags, clearly expecting short stays. He never saw them leave. Catherine told him they had moved on quickly, often before dawn, to catch transport for new jobs. Sarah Fleming, who managed a boarding house for respectable women, admitted she had sometimes sent destitute young women to the McKenna sisters, thinking she was helping them. Years later, she told Dugan through tears, "I thought those women were angels. I was sending those poor girls straight to hell and I didn't even know it." Dr. William Patterson, the town physician, remembered being called to examine several young women staying with the McKennas. The complaints were minor, but the sisters always hovered during the visits, and the women seemed unusually subdued, speaking in single words, avoiding eye contact. At the time, he chalked it up to shyness. Now, he wondered if they'd been drugged or threatened. The break in Dugan's investigation came from an unlikely ally, Dr. Helena Morrison, one of Colorado's few female physicians, who had been quietly documenting suspicious activity in Leadville for months. Dr. Helena Morrison had earned her medical degree from the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania, overcoming barriers that most in the 19th century believed women could never, or should never, cross. She had come to Colorado with a purpose: to serve frontier communities where women's health needs were often ignored, misunderstood, or judged harshly. In early 1880, she set up her practice in a small office above Murphy's General Store. Women quickly came to trust her, appreciating her discretion and her ability to treat them without embarrassment. She handled everything from difficult pregnancies to injuries from domestic violence, always keeping confidences. Over time, she built a quiet but detailed picture of the hazards women faced in mining towns. In her private journals, kept locked. In a safe and later shared with authorities, Dr. Morrison began documenting troubling patterns. Her training taught her to spot symptoms and connect them to broader threats, and what she was seeing pointed to something far more sinister than isolated misfortunes. In October 1880, a young woman named Clara Hoffman stumbled into her office. She could barely walk straight, her pupils dilated, her speech slurred, her memory fractured. These were classic signs of opium or laudanum intoxication, yet Clara insisted she had drunk nothing stronger than beer at the McKenna Saloon the night before. Clara's story was scattered, full of gaps that frightened her as much as they alarmed the doctor. She had arrived from Kansas only 3 weeks earlier, after drought and debt forced her family to abandon their farm. Alone and new to town, she'd been befriended by Margaret McKenna, who sympathized with her situation and offered her advice, and a cheap room above the saloon until she could find steady work. On her third night there, Margaret invited her to a special dinner to celebrate her decision to stay in Leadville. The food was excellent, the conversation warm, both sisters sharing tales of surviving without male protection. But after dessert, Clara felt unusually sleepy and excused herself early, blaming the mountain air. Her next clear memory was waking, more than 12 hours later, violently ill, with a pounding headache and nausea so severe she couldn't keep down water. She had also lost an entire day, and all her belongings. Her money, her clothing, family letters, even her mother's small Bible were gone. When Clara asked, Margaret claimed she had been sleepwalking, had packed her things herself, and had spoken of leaving town immediately. She suggested Clara had suffered a nervous breakdown. A story meant to cast doubt on her reliability. Dr. Morrison didn't believe it. Clara's sensations, floating, unable to control her movements, overhearing voices that seemed far away, matched laudanum. Dozing, Morrison urged her to tell Marshal Dugan, but Clara refused. Accusing the McKennas without proof could brand her a troublemaker, and in a town where women survived on community goodwill, that could be a death sentence. 2 weeks later, another case erased any thought of coincidence. Rebecca Tanner, 19, from Illinois, was brought in by a friend who found her wandering the streets at dawn, wearing only a nightgown and shoes, disoriented and unable to recall where she had been. Rebecca's last memory was dining with the McKenna sisters, who promised to introduce her to a Denver family seeking a governess, an ideal job for a young woman with 2 years of seminary schooling. Her symptoms were identical to Clara's, signs of laudanum intoxication. But Rebecca had bruises on her wrists and ankles, rope burns on her arms, and a terrifying fragment of memory, waking briefly in the back of a covered wagon with other people, realizing she was in danger. When the wagon stopped, she threw herself out and hid in the woods until her captors gave up searching and moved on without her. By January 1881, Marshal Dugan had enough evidence for a more aggressive investigation. But there was a problem, a dangerous one. The McKenna sisters weren't just respected, they were symbols of Leadville's civilized aspirations. Catherine had cultivated relationships with powerful men, including Horace Tabor, the silver magnate who dominated Colorado's political and economic scene. Her sharp mind and business skill had impressed them, and they often pointed to the McKennas as proof that the West could produce cultured, successful entrepreneurs. Margaret's work with local churches had won her the trust of religious leaders who saw her as a model of Christian charity. Convincing such allies that the sisters were predators, not protectors, would be the greatest challenge of all. The McKenna sisters had carefully woven themselves into Leadville's economy. They bought supplies from local merchants, hired local labor for building projects, and even loaned money to struggling shopkeepers during hard times. Their saloon brought in tax revenue and employed several townspeople, making them an asset to a community obsessed with growth and prosperity. Marshal Dugan knew that without ironclad evidence, any move against the sisters could backfire. They could cry persecution, claim he was targeting successful women out of jealousy or prejudice, and rally powerful allies to their defense. In such cases, the standard of proof was always higher than for men, especially for people with reputations and connections as solid as theirs. If they caught wind of an investigation, they could vanish. In the rapidly developing West, it was easy to reinvent yourself in another town, leaving no trace and no justice for the victims left behind. Dugan would have to catch them in the act, a process that required patience, even as he feared more. Women were suffering while he waited. The break came from the last person anyone expected, Anna Kowalski, Emma's sister, who had escaped captivity in San Francisco and fought her way back to Colorado, determined to bring the McKenna sisters down. Anna's survival was nothing short of extraordinary. For months, she had been trapped in a Barbary coast brothel, a 3-story hellhole crammed with nearly 40 women, all kept in line with a mix of drugs, beatings, and psychological manipulation. Escape seemed impossible. The women were held in debt bondage, told they owed huge sums for transportation, room, and board. The debt was designed never to be repaid. They were merchandise, not people. Her chance came during a police raid, an operation aimed at arresting customers for appearances rather than freeing victims. In the chaos, Anna slipped out a back window and disappeared into the maze of filthy alleys. Her journey back to Colorado took months. She hid when she had to, worked any job that would pay her without asking questions, washing dishes, scrubbing floors, cleaning offices, saving every cent until she could afford the trip. The physical toll was immense, but the psychological battle was worse. Holding on to her sanity meant clinging to one purpose: revenge. When she walked back into Leadville in February 1881, people barely recognized her. The sweet, naive girl from 18 months before was gone. In her place was a hardened young woman with a dead calm gaze and a fire in her voice. Emma had run east to escape the past. Anna had come back to bury it, and the McKenna sisters with it. Her testimony gave Marshal Dugan a detailed map of the trafficking network, more than he had ever guessed. Victims moved from Leadville to Denver, then to Salt Lake City, and finally to San Francisco, following routes designed to avoid law enforcement. Safe houses concealed them along the way. Corrupt officials pocketed bribes. Legitimate businesses acted as fronts. Anna named other women who had been trafficked, described the men who transported and guarded them, and explained the recruitment process. The sisters had a predator's instinct for spotting women who were alone, desperate, and unlikely to be missed. Most damning of all, Anna revealed that the McKenna sisters kept records, meticulous logs on every woman, her background, appearance, and the price she had been sold for. These files were stored in a locked cabinet in Margaret's private room, alongside personal items stolen from victims, trophies of their trade. Anna also detailed the breaking process once women reached their destinations. It started with drugs and abduction, but the true weapon was psychological warfare. Victims were told their families believed them dead, or that they were fugitives wanted by the law. They were convinced escape was hopeless. Those who resisted were beaten in ways that left no visible scars, threatened with harm to loved ones, or forced to watch others be punished. The cruelty was precise, calculated, not to kill, but to destroy the will. The operation was shockingly sophisticated for the era, a network stretching from rural farms to booming cities, feeding the West's relentless demand for women, in places where men outnumbered them 10 to 1. Anna's return to Leadville was a powder keg. She wanted a public confrontation to strip away the sisters' respectable masks for everyone to see. Dugan, however, was determined to stop her. He needed more evidence, and he feared the sisters might silence Anna before she ever spoke. If they knew a former victim was back in town, they wouldn't hesitate to either eliminate her or vanish before the law could touch them. The marshal found himself walking a razor's edge between justice and vengeance, trying to build a strong legal case while keeping a young woman, already scarred by tragedy, from destroying herself in the pursuit of revenge. Just when we thought we had uncovered the full scope of the McKenna sisters' crimes, Anna's return brought revelations, shocking enough to rattle even the toughest investigators. If this story is sending chills down your spine, share it with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our work, and subscribe so you never miss another tale like this. Now, let's see what happens as this twisted saga of deception and survival reaches its most dangerous turning point. In Leadville, tension hung thick in the air. Word spread quickly that something was brewing around the McKenna sisters. Anna's reappearance couldn't be hidden for long, and soon people who had known her before her disappearance began asking questions. Where had she been, and why did she look so different? The sisters sensed their grip was slipping. Catherine, always cautious in public, became even more guarded, declining invitations and avoiding conversations that might give away too much. Margaret, the more anxious of the two, began showing signs of severe strain. She paced at odd hours, her hands trembling when serving drinks. Employees at their saloon whispered that the sisters had grown demanding and paranoid, interrogating them about every conversation with customers and insisting on knowing every detail of their routines. Everything came to a head on a bitterly cold night in March 1881. Anna Kowalski, ignoring Marshal Dugan's warnings and his attempts to keep her under watch, decided to take matters into her own hands. For weeks, she had studied the McKenna Saloon, memorizing the sisters' routines, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came when she saw a young girl, maybe 17, arrive in town. The girl looked exhausted from travel, desperate for help. Her face carried the same mixture of hope and fear Anna remembered from her own first days in Leadville, an innocence that predators could spot a mile away. Anna watched as Catherine welcomed her with practiced warmth, offering food, comfort, and promises about a brighter future. It was the same performance Anna had seen 18 months earlier, and it ignited a storm of rage, guilt, and desperate resolve. That night, Anna walked into the McKenna Saloon armed with a Derringer pistol and a leather satchel stuffed with damning evidence, letters, photographs, documents, and testimonies from other victims she'd met during her captivity in San Francisco. Her plan was bold but simple. Confront the sisters publicly, lay out the evidence, and demand they confess in front of witnesses who could no longer pretend they didn't know. She believed public exposure would ruin them faster than any trial. What Anna didn't know was that the McKennas had been expecting trouble. They'd noticed increased law enforcement interest, heard whispers of former victims asking questions, and had been quietly preparing to flee Leadville before anyone could arrest them. When Anna entered that night, they were ready. She approached the bar and asked to speak to both sisters privately. Catherine recognized her immediately but stayed calm, subtly signaling Margaret, who slipped away to summon reinforcements. Within minutes, 3 armed men, faces Anna remembered from the trafficking route, were positioned around the room. Anna spoke with cold, precise fury. She named dates, routes, and operations that only an insider could know. She described the women trafficked to San Francisco, some murdered, some lost to disease, others vanished when they stopped being profitable. She demanded not just their surrender, but an explanation. How could they smile at desperate women while plotting their ruin? Catherine's reply was chilling. She denied nothing, but instead praised Anna's survival with a twisted sort of respect. The trafficking, she said, was just business, a lucrative frontier trade in which young women were simply a commodity. Her words dripped with the casual indifference of a cattle trader describing livestock. Before she could say more, Marshal Dugan and his deputies burst in. They had been monitoring the saloon, suspecting Anna's intentions, and moved in when they spotted the armed men. Gunfire erupted instantly. 2 of the sisters' men were killed in the first exchange. Anna was shot in the shoulder before Deputy James Crawford took down her attacker. Amid the chaos, Margaret McKenna was shot and killed by Deputy Thomas Riley, who mistook the key in her hand for a weapon. Catherine escaped through a rear exit, disappearing into the dark maze of Leadville's alleys, routes she had clearly prepared for such an emergency. Despite a massive manhunt that stretched across the Colorado Territory and beyond, Catherine McKenna vanished into the vast wilderness of the American West, carrying with her the secrets that could have unraveled the rest of the trafficking network. For weeks, law enforcement scoured towns and outposts from Denver to Salt Lake City. Wanted posters promising hefty rewards appeared as far west as San Francisco. She had clearly prepared for this moment. Money stashed away, safe houses established along escape routes, and allies ready to hide her. Sightings trickled in from multiple states, but none could be confirmed. Catherine McKenna disappeared from history as if swallowed by the frontier itself. The investigation of the McKenna Saloon uncovered horrors beyond Marshal Dugan's worst suspicions. Beneath the floorboards lay the clothing and personal belongings of trafficked women, along with meticulous business records. There were letters to criminal partners across the West, and maps outlining transportation routes that linked dozens of towns across several states and territories. Those records revealed that in just 2 years, the McKenna sisters had trafficked at least 47 young women, earning more than $15,000, a fortune in that era, far exceeding the profits of most legitimate Leadville businesses. The documents detailed payments to corrupt officials, transportation costs, safe house expenses, and even insurance payouts for women who were injured, killed, or otherwise lost during transport. Most chilling of all was what they found. In Margaret McKenna's private room, a collection of photographs, each paired with detailed notes. The images showed dozens of women in states of unconsciousness or distress. These were not for business. They were trophies, evidence of a cruelty that went beyond profit into something deeply personal and sadistic. The fallout from the case rippled across Colorado and the greater frontier. Communities were forced to face uncomfortable truths about how easily evil could hide in plain sight. Federal authorities joined the effort, uncovering links to trafficking operations in at least 6 other states and territories. Coordinated raids in Denver, Salt Lake City, and San Francisco led to multiple arrests, dismantling much of the network. The case revealed not random violence, but organized criminal enterprises running with the efficiency of legitimate businesses, crossing state lines, paying off officials, and exploiting the law's blind spots. Anna Kowalski survived her wounds, but the confrontation left permanent scars. She became one of the first voices to openly advocate for anti-trafficking laws, testifying before both territorial and federal lawmakers. Her courage in speaking publicly, despite the heavy social stigma, helped push through stronger penalties for kidnapping and improved cooperation between states to pursue traffickers. Her example gave other survivors the strength to come forward. Dr. Helena Morrison's medical records proved vital in prosecuting the network. Her documentation of poisoning cases linked directly to trafficking operations, and her courtroom testimony gave credibility to survivors' accounts. She continued her practice in Leadville, developing medical protocols for recognizing and treating trafficking victims, and working alongside law enforcement to improve investigative procedures in crimes against women. Marshal William Dugan earned a promotion to U.S. Marshal and devoted much of his career to hunting the remaining members of the network. He never stopped searching for Catherine McKenna. For over a decade, he chased rumors, some placing her in Mexico, others claiming she operated under false names in distant cities. But she was never definitively found or brought to justice. The McKenna case reshaped the West's approach to protecting vulnerable women. Churches created aid networks for female travelers. Law enforcement developed more coordinated systems for investigating missing women. It exposed how criminals exploited not only the lawless reputation of the frontier, but also society's assumptions about women's roles. In the end, the sisters succeeded for years not because they were brilliant criminals, but because they knew how to exploit trust. They turned the frontier's hospitality and sense of community into weapons. This story is a stark reminder that the most trusted faces can hide the darkest truths, and that evil often wears the mask of respectability. So, what do you think? Was the whole truth ever revealed? Or are there still secrets buried deep in those Colorado mountains? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this tale and want more chilling frontier mysteries, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share this story with a friend who loves the dark side of history. See you in the next video.